What you're hearing now is an uncanny, eerie voice from a distant past. Despite the recording took place in 1904, this voice has echoed throughout the ages. From the festive courts of the Italian Renaissance, through shining theatres to the austere chapels of the Vatican. It's the voice of the castrati, of the very last one of them, Alessandro Moreschi. To be a castrato, this means having both testicles removed in young age in the hope of acquiring a sublime voice. This ancient, almost biblical barbarism was part of an old Italian musical tradition that flourished between 17th and 18th century. And yet, while Henry Ford set a new automobile speed record of 147 km per hour, while engineers began work to create the Panama Canal, while the International Alliance of Women was founded, while the world paced into the 20th century, while all of this was happening, Alessandro Moreschi sang. Out of his time, he sang. His voice slid down the phonograph's horn and ended up carved on a wax cylinder. There it rested, enshrined like a relic from another era. But please don't be fooled by acoustics. The voice you heard is not just a voice. It belongs to innumerable people. Their voices, so disparate and unique, are now channeled through that one voice. You see, Moreschi's life is part of a wider story, one story that encompasses multiple stories of different people, from different ages. It certainly is a complicated narrative, full of knots, rich in loose ends, difficult to unravel. But do not worry, we'll get to the bottom of this. Please, bear with me. This story comes from Ars Dicendi, and today we are dealing with Italian culture. Alessandro Moreschi was the last one of his kind. He took the stage when the castrati's era was greeting the dusk. His personal life, his career, were deeply influenced by the way the contemporary musical world interpreted the castrato voice, its function, its uses. But Moreschi's beginning was not too different from the childhood of any other castrato from any other time. He was born in 1858 in a small town near Rome. The seventh child of his parents, he grew up in a dramatically undeveloped country. According to Moreschi's account, he used to sing as a boy in a chapel just outside his hometown. That's probably where his teacher heard him for the first time. Since the early stages of the castrato era, in the second half of the 16th century, wandering teachers used to scout for promising voices, both in town and rural areas. Once they found a candidate, they made contact with the family and explained to them that thanks to a surgical operation they could set their son for life. Castrato voices were highly regarded in courts and choirs. The job was well paid, the lifestyle more than enjoyable. By giving their consent, parents freed themselves of the economic burden a son represented. The boy would have enrolled at one of the several music schools, where he would have studied until his debut. At that point, his income would have covered for his living expenses, and who knows, he might have also benefited the old parents. For poor, illiterate farmers, this was the chance of a lifetime. We don't fathom how many parents of young, promising voices accepted the deal. We only know that Moreschi's did. Like many others before him, he underwent what is called bilateral orchiectomy, which in brief consists of getting rid of both testicles. It was a dangerous surgery, and many children found their hand, while so-called experts exerted their arts. An entire town, Norcia, in the Umbria region, was devoted to such practices. The butchers, or norcini, learned their craft while operating pigs destined to the fattening. Then they turned their knives on little kids. Testicles secrete testosterone, the hormone that makes the bird grow and the voice deepen. By removing the major source of testosterone before puberty, normal development is compromised in several ways. For instance, this hormonal deficiency might cause excessive growth of the limbs. As a consequence, some castrati had very long legs and arms that, together with disproportionate rib cages, made them look like scarecrows, as their detractors called them. The castrata's body also developed female secondary sex characteristics, such as large breasts, fat tights, and belly. Of course, the lack of testosterone inhibits the growth of facial hair. Despite this unpromising introduction, castrati did not develop each one of these features to the maximum degree. They were not freaks, and most of them had a pretty bland figure. According to several accounts, in fact, some castrati exert an androgynous fascination over their public, attracting men and women alike. And they certainly had a sexual life, because despite being sterile, they could still experience sexual attraction and perform sexual acts. But in which way did orchiectomy influence the quality of the voice?
Well, if the castration is carried out before puberty, the normal changes to the human voice in general that take place during puberty do not happen.
This is Nicholas Clapton. He is a professional countertenor, singing teacher and writer about music. In particular, he is the author of Moreschi and the Voice of the Castrato, a biography of Alessandro Moreschi.
What this means is that the vocal cords more or less remain the same size. They remain the size of a child's, but other parts of the skeleton grow as an adult skeleton does. The tract of the voice above the vocal cords, the pharynx, the structures of the head, the mouth become more complicated. In the castrati's case, there were one or two very interesting things that happened there. The castration affected the development of some of the bones of the skull. It seems that some castrati at least had quite a projecting upper jaw, which may have affected the way they sang. So you have this tiny valve, because that's what the larynx is, which is over which the air is passing, and the chamber, the reservoir of air, could be a lot bigger. Therefore, they could sing for a lot longer without taking an extra breath. If you look at some of the very virtuosic music that was written in the 18th century, they would sing for almost a minute without breathing, which is unheard of. Absolutely impossible for anybody nowadays. It's like scuba diving while singing a Handel aria. This is a rather complicated thing to do.
From a physiological standpoint, due to the lack of testosterone production, the larynx remains small, flexible, and doesn't descend in the throat. The vocal cords also stop growing. Bear in mind, though, that each castrato had his own unique voice, shaped by daily exercises and influenced by his personal physiology. In general, though, they could all rely on an hybrid vocal instrument. The castrato's larynx was similar in size and position to a boy's larynx. The only significant difference is that it operated within a fully grown man's body. On one side, the castrato was able to sing in the same range as a woman without turning to falsetto. On the other, he had a larger ribcage, nose and mouth that could amplify his voice and enrich the timbre. The interplay between these elements and many years of practice gave birth to a powerful, agile vocalism whose sounds were often described as silvery, otherworldly. It doesn't come as a surprise that castrato voice was somehow conceived as a third voice, but manly and feminine. This idea of a third voice could be connected to the way people perceived sex and gender back in the days. Male and female were considered to be poles of the same sex instead of being two different sexes. Women could then oscillate towards the male polarity to interpret male heroic characters, dressed as members of the opposite sex, as often happened in Baroque opera. The same was valid for the castrato's voice, which occupied the third middle place between these two poles. Noemi André, who is a musicologist and a professor at the University of Michigan, expands on the matter.
The modern idea is that women and men, masculinity, femininity, what's male, what's female, are opposite. And there's a two-sex model. During this time when the castrati were flourishing, there was a one-sex model where this fluidity that I found in sound, how, a female's voice and a male's voice could both be heroic, could be male or female. There was an idea of how gender and sex were constructed, that there was one type of gender. Men were the more perfect expressions of gender, and women were the less perfect expression. So it was almost a continuum. So this construction of what is male and what is female allowed for this spaciousness of one continuum. This, I thought, wow, that can be related to this idea of a castrato voice and a woman's voice both being acceptable as what could be heroic. They occupied an in-between space.
It's very difficult for us to imagine how a castrato voice will sound, even if we have a few recordings left of Alessandro Moreschi, singing solo and in choir.